Have you ever wondered how biostasis works? Let us guide you through it. Medical biostasis is an advanced technology that aims to give you the best chance to live much longer than what is currently possible. But why do people want to live longer? Some people just love life and want to experience it for as long as possible. Some people are just curious about the future. They want to see what future cities will be like and what humanity will be able to achieve. Others think the world would be better and more fair if the length of your life was your own choice. There is no doubt that you will ever run out of things to do in a multifaceted world like the one we live in. In the end, the motivations are plentiful. But how can someone sign up for biostasis? First, you simply sign up with us and our insurance partner. It just takes a few minutes. To start, we only need some personal information. Don't worry, it's a simple process and we will guide you through every step of the way. Biostasis is achieved with the help of cryopreservation. Cryopreservation is a very advanced procedure that's still rather expensive and therefore not widely available. Tomorrow offers high-quality cryopreservation with prices starting from €100,000 and going all the way up to €400,000. Of course, this is a lot of money that few people can easily afford. But there is a solution. Together with our big-term life insurance partner, we offer a subscription model which brings the cost down to only €30 a month. About 90% of all biostasis contracts are funded via a term life insurance model. Let's say you're 30 years old and you want to sign up. The first thing you need to do is sign up with Tomorrow Biostasis, and we automatically contract with our term life insurance partner for your coverage. Now, should you pass away during the coverage period, the term life insurance will cover 100% of the cryopreservation cost. You are protected from day one. Should you pass away after the coverage period, then unfortunately the term life insurance will not cover the cryopreservation cost. But of course there are other funding options for this situation as well. We make sure that our customers have everything in place well in advance. Furthermore, there is a high chance that prices will come down significantly in the future, as we work consistently to reduce the cost of a high-quality cryopreservation. Congratulations! You are now fully signed up. Now, should anything happen to you where current medical technology can't save you, like a terminal heart disease, cancer, or whatever it might be, and the worst case happens and you should die, our team stands ready to pick you up and bring you to a medical research institute that is equipped for cryopreservation. Cryopreservation is an advanced procedure that uses medical cryoprotectant solution and very low temperatures to protect your body, and most importantly your brain, the part that makes you, against degradation. We keep you safe and sound for however long it takes until medical technology will be advanced enough that revival is possible. While we can't guarantee, that is arguably better than any other option. Then, once technology makes it possible, we will revive you. Should you have gotten cryopreserved at an old age, then revival will only be done once rejuvenation technology is available and the human lifespan is much longer than it currently is. Sometimes people are worried that life in the future might not be as enjoyable as it is today. But if history has shown us anything, it is that the average quality of life keeps getting better during the years. Now, after revival, you are free to continue your life as fit and happy as ever. Of course, this is a complex topic where a short video doesn't really do it justice. We are more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Just reach out to us. Find out more.
Welcome everybody to our new 2023 webinar series from Tomorrow Bio. Last year, we did a couple of these webinars where there was an introduction and then an advanced webinar, and then of course always a lot of Q&A. This year, we will dig much deeper into the individual topics. So this today will only be the first installment of our multi-part webinar series. Today is a very broad introduction. So everybody who has been to any of our prior webinars, either the introduction or the advanced one, or has just in general been exposed to the topic of cryopreservation or cryonics or biostasis, will probably know most, if not all of it. There's a couple new slides, of course, but in general, consider this a very broad introduction. It will basically not only serve as a live webinar, but also as a series of then later on published on YouTube videos, so that if, for whatever reason, someone from your friends or colleagues is interested in this topic and wants to dig a bit deeper than just a brief introduction by maybe you, then it would also solve as something that you can link that person to, so they can really, within a couple of hours of watching webinars, get a pretty good understanding. So now, without further ado, let's dig in and go through the introduction to cryopreservation or cryonics. First, for those of you who have not met us or met me, and of course for everybody who might watch this video many years down the line on YouTube, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Emil. By training, I'm a doctor. I actually studied medicine to go into the field of longevity, of life extension. And not only to make people live healthily while they're old, but also to research what can be done to allow people to live significantly longer than it's currently possible. I went a bit into cancer research as kind of my first part of my career, then built a few tech companies, some related to medicine, some totally different things like data analysis. And now I'm running or have co-founded basically 3 big organizations. One is Tomorrow Bio, here based in Berlin in Germany, which is a cryopreservation provider kind of doing all the day-to-day work. Then there's the European Biostasis Foundation, which is a non-profit research foundation, very much focused on the research in cryopreservation, which of course, as we will see in one of the next webinar installments, is a very important part. And last but not least, for the very out there, very long-term, very moonshot-trotty type of research projects, we're currently in the process of setting up a CryoDAO, which will be a DAO-like entity, or it's actually a DAO, that will fund very long-term, fundamental, basic research at university labs. So I already mentioned it. This year is a multi-part webinar series. In fact, there will be 11 parts. Today will be the introduction, and you see here on the slides the multiple different webinars, from how SST and the procedures and how the medical part works, to long-term storage and research and ethical considerations, how funding work, what might need to be done to make revival at some point possible. Of course, that's going to be a bit speculative, and so on and so on. So always there's an introduction or like a talk of somewhere between, let's say, 30 and 40 minutes initially, and then I'm more than happy, of course, to answer all questions. So today will be the introduction. And if you have any questions, you have 2 ways of asking these questions. First of all, we use the Slido tool. So go to sli.do, enter this number that you see on your screen right now, or scan the QR code that you see on the right side. There you can ask questions and you can upvote questions. So if a specific question is of particular interest to you, you can give it a thumbs up. For the possibility that we will have too many questions and run out of time, then the questions that have the most upvotes, of course, would get priority. The other way would be, you probably watch us on YouTube. So in YouTube chat, you have the opportunity to just ask the questions in YouTube chat, and we would go through those as well. But we're going to prioritize the ones that are on Slido, so use those. So now write down this number or scan the QR code. That will be the way of how to ask questions. And now, without further ado, let's start and dig in. So for people who might not have thought about cryopreservation for that long, I think it's always important to kind of set the stage a bit. Cryopreservation, of course, is a very, kind of futuristic, some people might say even science fiction-like topic. But I think it's always very important if you talk about and think about these potentially very long in the future topics, that there was a time when stuff that we currently consider as absolutely normal and standard and no one really thinks about it was, just like cryopreservation might be today, very science fiction-like, right? And of course, my example from the medical field is always the fact that the first heart transplantation was only done around 40 and a bit years ago. So in fact, this here is the Time magazine cover from the first heart transplantation case in 1967. So not really long ago. And of course, if you would have asked a doctor, let's say 10 years before that, you're taking one heart from one human and put it into another human, that would have sounded quite strange, arguably, and weird, and maybe even not really something that everybody would be down for, right? And of course now heart transplantations is something that no one would want to miss. And of course this is now a relatively short-term example, but you can take planes as well. There was a time when flying to another continent would be absolutely unheard of, and not only unheard of, almost unthinkable. So I think it's always quite important to remember that things that are totally or might sound impossible, at least to some people right now, are then possible the day after, and might be absolutely standard the next day. Just like heart transplantation definitely was sounded impossible, let's say 100 years ago, then at some point it was possible, and now it's absolutely standard where no one really thinks about it anymore, at least not in the day-to-day, and definitely would not want to miss it as a medical procedure should they need it. So this is kind of to set the stage. And now when we go to cryopreservation, of course, one of the important questions is always, why would anybody even want to do that? Right? So for that we ran a large study. It's actually here on the bottom of the page. You see the source. It's published in a peer-reviewed journal. So if you want to check it out, please do so. Where we asked people a lot of questions about how they think about living longer, living very long, and all these technologies. And one of the questions that I felt was quite striking was when you asked them, how many people agree with the statement, if I could live indefinitely, I would. Right? And of course, indefinitely is a very, very long time, arguably at least. But still, 26% of people that we asked said, yeah, this is something I agree with. And it doesn't really matter where you are. The study was done in the US, but also then replicated in Germany. And even if you could look at other types of published research, it's always somewhere in this 20 to 30% range where people say, I would like to be able to live very, very, very long, if not indefinitely, and I definitely want to have that choice to make that call myself. And of course, there's a multitude of reasons why they might want to do that. Some of the people just, they just enjoy life. They want to have, the positive experience of, I don't know, living day to day, going on vacation, experience new things, you name it. Of course, it's a very personal choice, but, just the fact that they like and enjoy life, that they would like to have go on for longer. Then there's a group of people who are just excited about the future. Of course, there's a lot of overlap between these two groups. See how future societies might develop, what will be possible technologically in the future, and so on. You can imagine space travel, a lot of things that might be partly imaginable, but also stuff, of course, that currently arguably is not imaginable. And last but not least, there's a group of people who just think, hey, if people would be able to choose how long they live, this is just fundamentally a moral good. It would be a better world if disease and accidents and so on would not be a factor where someone then, in quotation marks, dies before they want to. So again, a lot of overlap between these different groups. These are the fundamental motivations why people think about cryopreservation. And then, in the end, after having thought about it, after having weighed the pros and cons, and basically after having had the opportunity to make an informed decision, decide to be cryopreserved should they die at some point in the future. Now, if you look at this in another way, right, when we think about cryopreservation, sometimes or some people think about the fact, someone who's 85 has lived their life, right, might even not have the greatest quality of life, at least in some people's mind, but that's of course an individual decision. But that's of course not the only people who die. There's a tremendous amount of people, unfortunately, who die very young, like just due to cancer. hundreds of thousands of children get cancer, incurable cancer that is currently not curable. Right? There's a lot of diseases, Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, and so on, that if you're being diagnosed with them, no matter how old you are, they're practically death sentences. It's just a matter how long it takes until you unfortunately inevitably will die. And of course, if you think about, the 90-year-old or the 85-year-old, very few people actually get to that age. It's about 1%. So there's a lot of reasons why people might consider that they would like to live longer. It's just medically not possible right now. And even though there's a lot of open problems, open questions, open research topics in the field of cryopreservation, and we're going to cover them maybe in Q&A today, but also then, of course, in the next webinars, cryopreservation might be potentially, it's important to say, it's just a chance. It might be a solution or at least a stopgap measure. Now, when you look at this topic of anti-aging and longevity medicine, of course, has gotten to be quite a prominent topic. You might have seen it, a couple of years ago, Time magazine titled, "Will Google Solve Death?" And of course, there's quite a few other stories like that, that it might in fact be at some point possible to live significantly longer just by, in quotation marks, just by medical interventions. But if you look at these curves, some of you might have seen these curves, they basically show how many people survive when they get older, right? And these curves are basically from different, birth dates. And for example, in the 1980s, only a very few percentages gets to the age of, let's say, 80, and then everybody is dead somewhere between 80 and 90. What is shown here that over time, due to medical improvements, things have gotten better, so more people get to an older age, but it has not been possible yet to make anybody live longer. Everybody is still, statistically speaking, dead somewhere between 90 and 100 years. And of course, the chart that you just saw is from a bit in the past, but if you took a more recent chart, this situation, even though, of course, there's continuously medical improvements, this chart has pretty much stayed the same. Even though more and more people get older and more people have high quality of life when they get older, mentally and physically, everybody then still dies till 80, so somewhere between 80, 90 and 100. And cryopreservation, arguably, of course, again, could be a stopgap measure for that, to bridge the time until in the future it might in fact be possible to not only live healthily till 85, but live significantly longer while being healthy. The while being healthy part, of course, is always very important, and of course all the field works for that as well. And the reason for that is, of course, that biology is extremely complex. This is just a small part of all the interactions between different parts of processes, of cellular processes, that would need to be to a degree somehow changed to be able to live longer. While in some animals it is possible to actually by, for example, genetic changes allow them to live longer, none of it unfortunately works in humans as of yet. And it does not look like there's any low-hanging fruits where it will be possible to do anything about that anytime soon. And while of course that research is go ongoing, every day around 180,000 people unfortunately do die, either due to diseases or what we would currently call old age, which of course there's always some underlying condition. Just because the people are old, we don't really consider what the underlying condition is, so that's why it's called death due to old age or natural causes. Arguably, some people, it's difficult to say how many, but definitely some would probably rather not die. And that's why cryopreservation is here. Now, what is cryopreservation? What is human cryopreservation? What is human biostasis? What is cryonics? All of these words are almost interchangeably, with some differences, of course. And in one of the next installments, we're going to dig into those differences as well. So it's definitely not what you see here on the left. When you read articles about cryopreservation, then usually one of these kinds of images is being used. Couldn't be further from the truth. And of course, we always try to then argue with the journalists to maybe use a different image. Usually we lose that discussion because they say we need an image where, it's within 1 second, the audience kind of understands what it's about. But cryopreservation, of course, is something fundamentally different. It does use very, very low temperatures, so definitely not like water ice, but temperatures of around negative 140 degrees Celsius to around negative 196 degrees Celsius, so really, really low. But quite the opposite from having ice crystals form, from having an ice cube or anything ice-related form. A lot of the technology that we use is there to not have ice crystals form. So what is being used are so-called medical cryoprotective agents, or cryoprotective agents that are practically medical antifreeze solutions. So solutions that replace the water in the body, including the blood and so on, and also cellular water, and all of the water that there basically is, against a solution that you can cool down very, 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 very low without having ice crystals form. It's a so-called vitrified state. Vitrified, not a word that most people use every day. It basically means a glass-like amorphous state where you can maintain very, very, very low temperatures without ice crystals. And due to the multitude of reasons, and again, also here we're going to dig deeper in one of the next webinars, due to a multitude of reasons, these ice crystals are damaging to the structure. So what you need to do, you need to basically cool down without ice crystals. At that temperature, there's no degradation processes anymore. The metabolic activity is zero. Nothing degrades, nothing changes. Now you can maintain that state, that cryopreserved, that vitrified state, practically speaking, indefinitely. And now, of course, indefinitely means until 3 things can become true. A, you need to be able to cure the underlying condition that killed the person in the first place. Let it be cancer. B, once you bring back that patient, the remaining lifespan that an average person of that age, let's say you cryopreserve someone when they're 85, now of course it doesn't make sense to bring them back if the average life expectancy at that point is 86, right? Then they would live 1 year and then die again. So there needs to be a relevant amount of remaining life expectancy. And last but not least, you need to, of course, be able to reverse the cryopreservation procedure. Currently, you can bring people into cryopreservation, but you can't take them out for a wide range of topics. And there's going to be one webinar about problems why revival currently doesn't work and why it probably will not work within the next couple of years or even decades, if not potentially centuries. We will cover that there. But in principle, once you're being cryopreserved with good quality, then you can maintain in cryopreservation, in cryostasis for, practically indefinitely, and then kind of in quotation marks, wait it out until technology, and specifically medical technology, has advanced enough to reverse the procedure. And then arguably, you would be able to live on or live again. The steps for that are practically kind of in 4 big groups, right? First of all, for me and for us, it's very important that people decide for or against cryopreservation after really having made an informed decision, meaning knowing the pros and the cons. The biggest con is, of course, that A, cryopreservation is unfortunately relatively expensive. We have an individual webinar about funding. And B, we don't know yet if and when it will work. It's possible that it will never work. It's possible that it will take a tremendous amount of time until it might work. So relevant cons. But on the other hand, if you're currently being diagnosed with a terminal disease, then your choice is practically being cremated or buried or cryopreserved. So I would argue the pro, of course, is that at least the chance with cryopreservation is better. It's better than 0. Whereas with cremation or burial, arguably, as much as we understand, apart from any very metaphysical arguments, the chance to ever come back is 0, right? So if the alternative is 0, cryopreservation is at the minimum better. I and no one can tell you how high the chance is, but it's probably higher than 0. Right? So if people then sign up and decide if I should die, then I would like to be cryopreserved after making all of that deliberation. And of course, we're happy to provide all the information. But then again, the person needs to be able, and that's of course our responsibility, needs to be able to make an informed decision pro or against. Then the second part would be how to fund cryopreservations. Right, cryopreservation somewhere range between 60 and 200,000 euros. Can even go a bit higher, but that's kind of the the average-ish range. So you can fund it with a range of life insurances, with trusts, with last wills, with direct payment, and so on. There's a wide variety. Again, also that's going to be a separate webinar. And then once you have signed up, once you have decided, okay, so this is the way I'm going to fund it, then you would be we would monitor the situation, right? Hopefully, everybody who signs up, lives for many, many years. But then should something happen, of course, we need to be able to know as quick as possible so that we can send one of our medical teams. That's kind of the second part. We have multiple medical teams. I'll show you some pictures in a second, that if something happens to one of our members, or it might look like something might happen to one of our members, right, we dispatch one of those teams. The team is waiting around, and then should the person really be should die, and after they've been legally pronounced, we cannot do anything before that. Once they've legally been pronounced, take over and do the cryopreservation procedure. That would then, in most cases, already be in Switzerland with the non-profit foundation. That foundation would then be tasked with keeping you in cryopreservation for as long as it might take. And then once in the far future potentially, once technology has advanced enough, it might be possible then to revive the patient for them to live on. And of course that part is currently where the most speculation comes into this field. But and most of the field, and I haven't heard any good arguments against it either, I'm not aware of any fundamental reason why it cannot work in principle. There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't work right now, and in one of our research webinars we're going to discuss that in more depth. But fundamentally, there doesn't seem to be anything that is not solvable in principle. Now, as I just said, we have these medical teams. Once you've signed up, right, and then should something happen to you now, then we need to make sure that we're with you as quick as possible. Currently, we have teams in Europe, some our own, some with partners, some currently in construction. Not only professional teams, but we're also building, with local doctors, with local teams, with local volunteers, kind of first response teams, emergency response teams. Of course, we're going to train them and so on. It's not something you can just do next day, but to have a very good coverage if something happens last minute, that we're going to be able to take over. And apart from Europe, we're more and more also getting ready to launch teams in the US, not for the whole US yet, but in local cities. So one will be around New York metro area, one will be in southern Florida around Miami, one will be Portland and Seattle. These three should probably already launch this year, and then either end of this year or early 2024 will be the last team, which will be San Francisco Bay Area, covering kind of these local areas, about one, maybe slightly more hour of driving around where we have the team located. So these teams would always be able to do all the initial cool down, right? Once the heart stops beating, what happens is that the cells in the brain are not supplied with oxygen anymore, or at least not well supplied, where they then would start basically a degradation process. If you cool down, you stop that process. And then the further you cool, as we've just discussed, you need to give this cryoprotective agent. This is also what these teams can do to not have ice crystals form. At that point, the patient then can be transported to one of the long-term storage facilities for final cool down and then long-term storage at cryogenic temperatures. So that's always step one. This is one of these, how one of these ambulances looks from the inside. This is from one of the trainings. Basically they're mobile operating rooms, retrofitted to do cryopreservations, or more precisely cryoprotections, meaning, stabilization and so on, and then initial cool down, but not to cryogenic temperatures yet on site, to do cryoprotection on site wherever the patient might be. Now, once then, the patient's cryoprotection has been done, now we would be on the way to, in our case for Europe specifically and especially, to a long-term storage facility, in our case in Switzerland. It's kind of a combined facility, so it has research labs. You see here on the right one of our labs, but then it can also do the whole medical procedure. It has a CT scanner for quality assurance and everything that is needed to make sure that the cryopreservation was done well. And last but not least, of course, it has, and you see this here in the middle picture, it has a large storage facility, a large patient storage room where cryopreserved patients can be stored for the long term. And in our case, that's actually underground, so that's the building here from the outside, where it says long-term care facility. That's the part where it starts, and it goes to the left of the picture underground for maximum stability and safety, even if it takes decades and if not centuries. And again, I can't say how long it will actually take. So if you're ever in Switzerland, we host regular conferences at least once a year there. So feel free to drop by or drop us a line if you're ever around. More than happy, of course, for you to visit us there as well. Now, apart from all of the operations of cryopreservation, doing the day-to-day service basically, we also do a lot of in regards to research. Cryopreservation, you can do cryopreservations right now, right? The initial part can be done, but there's a tremendous amount of effort that will be needed to make sure, A, that people are cryopreserved with higher quality, and then B, that at some point, the research is being done and the research is pushed far enough so that it might be possible to revive people. So research and R&D is always, at least 50% of what we think about. So over time, Tomorrow Bio has kind of built or started to build a network of different research organizations around it. As I said, EBF, the European Biostasis Foundation, of course, is doing research. We already talked briefly about CryoDAO, which does this very, very basic, long-term, moonshot-like research, mostly at university labs. And then there's a range of other partners that we work with that run labs that do in quotation marks specific research topics. And here on the right you see a couple of topics that we currently are engaged with, that we're working on, that we think have high priority, and then a couple of moonshot projects will be announced over the course of this year. All in all, research is going to be very, very important, and it's very important and very close to us and our focus. Yeah, so that is kind of the short introduction to the topic. And again, I'm more than happy to answer any question. So feel free to put all the questions that you have either in Slido now or in the YouTube chat. And as I said, this is the first webinar in an 11-part series. So the next one will be on March 23rd, again between 6 and 7 p.m. CET, so European time, and it will be about procedures and SST. SST means standby, stabilization, and transport. So all the the medical part, what needs to be done, how do you need to do it, what's important, how do you do quality, and all of that. So it will be again on this YouTube channel, so you will see when we go live. Follow us on YouTube, and of course we'll send out an email as well. And of course, if any of your friends might be interested or colleagues, feel free to send our information, our links to them, so they can sign up as well. And please reach out to us, right? If all these webinars can only be like a broad introduction. So if you have any specific questions or topics that you would like to discuss, absolutely reach out to us. Even if you're might not be even decided if you want to ever sign up or feel like this topic is even interesting, right? Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. You can do that by just emailing hello@tomorrowbiostasis.com. You can go to our webpage, tomorrow.bio, and use the live chat feature and live chat with us. You can also go to our webpage tomorrow.bio/schedule-a-consultation, and of course you also find the link and in fact like the calendar where we have open slots directly on the webpage if you want to just have a chat with us, right? And again, there's no obligation, of course. No matter how interested you are in the topic, we're more than happy to talk. And if you just want to call us, of course, feel free to do that as well. Now, without further ado, we would switch to Q&A. So all questions that you might have, and of course, feel free to put more questions in. I'm going to switch over to mobile and see if there's any questions. And maybe there are any questions on Slido. Right, okay, cool, perfect. And by the way, if you want to have any specific questions answered, feel free to upvote the questions that you might have, and then I'm going to cover those first. All right, we're starting on Slido and then go over to YouTube. So the first question is, I saw a blog post about pet cryopreservation on your site, but where do I actually sign up my pet and what are the prices? So pet cryopreservation is indeed something we do offer. You need to be a member with us though, right? So you need to be signed up yourself and then you can sign up your pet. The reason for that is that of course it doesn't make much sense to cryopreserve your pet, but then let's say 80, 100, whatever, how many years in the future it is possible to bring someone back from cryopreservation. And then if you're not around, who's going to bring back your pet, right? So for pet cryopreservation, it's only possible to sign up a pet if the member signs, or like if the current owner signs up, then it's possible. So if you're a member with us, feel free to reach out. We can send you the link and all the mechanistics of how to sign up. Pet cryopreservation is a bit less standardized because of course there are pets which are very small, like let's say hamsters, and then on the other side you have horses. Of course there's a wide difference in prices and how the procedure would works, and even just within cats and dogs there's a big difference in size. So that's kind of an individual process, but feel free to reach out at any point. The second point would be, with high inflation, what if the 200,000 euros are not enough anymore when I die in, let's say, 20 years? So the model is built, so these 200,000 euros are built, or the price is set, so that there is a relevant amount of inflation adjustment already calculated into it. Of course, recently, in 2022 and beginning of 2023, we had very, very high inflation. Which I don't think will happen, but if inflation stays as high and doesn't go back to about the 2% that we had over the last decades, then these prices would need to go up at some point. If inflation stays at 2%, then prices will be stable for quite a bit of time, and then at some point they might need to go up, a decade from now, 2 decades or something like that. We would always recommend to overfund your cryopreservation. So 200,000 is the minimum, but for example, let's say you take out some type of insurance, then we would always recommend to rather go a bit higher than that to account for potential inflation. One more thing, we're very much working on making cryopreservation cheaper, both in nominal terms, so the 200,000, and in absolute terms. The reason for that is that currently, cryopreservation is, unfortunately, for some people, prohibitively expensive, which is I think it's, in our view, that's unacceptable. It's not easy to change, because due to the fact that so few people are being cryopreserved right now, it just cannot be much cheaper. But once more people sign up, and potentially also with technological advances, it might in fact be possible to bring the cost down. There have been calculations that show that at scale, if a lot of people want to be cryopreserved per year, which might take a good amount of time to get there, then cost can come down even to 20,000, 10,000, like even lower than that. Really, really affordable, and we're working on that. So hopefully over time, the inflation effect and the effect of bringing the cost down due to scale and technological advances would kind of counteract each other. For now, the price is it's not like that. We want to do an increase of these 200,000 euros at some point, but it might be possible, even though people have signed up in the past. Then in most cases only potentially need to have a small increase. And of course, if we ever see that coming or believe that might come, we would let people know, years and years in advance. Right. Next question would be: Are there already some members standby teams formed? How do the process must be done with Tomorrow Bio to make this happen? So indeed, we're working on building local SST teams, standby, stabilization and transport teams, even though they would do less of the stabilization and transport. But standby and a part of stabilization can be done by local teams. So if someone is interested, either in Germany or someone abroad all over Europe or even in the US, is interested to building a local team, we're more than happy to help. Just reach out to us and we can discuss all the details. Of course, there's training involved. Of course, there's some legal structures involved and so on. So it's not something that can be done from this day to the next. But we're more than happy to work with you. So absolutely feel free to reach out and we can discuss. Next question would be: Can family members of the patient visit the stored body? So technically that is possible. Of course, it's a research facility, so it's slightly less possible than maybe with a cemetery or something like that. But it is possible, just not on every day and so on. So there's some limitations, but it is in principle, of course, possible. Next question would be: What happens to a person, legally speaking, if they're pronounced legally dead but are revived later? What will their legal status be? So whenever we talk about what will happen when someone potentially survived, we're fully, both technologically, legally, socially, all of that, we're going very much in the realm of speculation. We don't know, at least not definitively, but there's some indication how that might work. So usually legal structures, laws, how stuff is handled legally follows what is technologically possible. So very likely, once it's technologically or starts to be, imaginable or even feasible that someone can be brought back from cryopreservation, then the legal system of the future would probably, catch up and find a way of how that works. It's not absolutely unheard of, conceptually, that sometimes something similar-ish happens when people get lost at sea. Of course, not something that happens every day or even regularly, but it has happened. When people are lost at sea, and are legally declared dead, but then found again, they can be reintegrated, kind of similar legal structure, right? They've been declared dead and then somehow, it turns out that they weren't dead after all. There is a way of how they get their passport back and so on. How exactly that would work in the future is of course not clear, but I'm reasonably confident that that would not be a limiting factor. Maybe in some countries it might be very difficult, but then you would find other countries that are significantly more liberal with it, where you would then have an opportunity to have that person also legally reintegrated in society. And of course, part of the money, what is being kept aside for long-term storage, would also then be used for these kind of questions and problems and reintegration processes. Right. Next questions would be: we would like to do some volunteering work. Tell us, I don't see yours, can you scroll down a slight amount? Tell us if that's possible. Of course that's possible. So we're more than happy for anybody and everybody who is interested in somehow contributing to the field of cryopreservation. We're more than happy, to talk and see if there's something that we, can work together. There's a lot of things what we do and where someone might join in research topics, in writing, in community management. We're open sourcing one of our apps very soon. So if you're a developer, then getting involved in that might be interesting. So there's a huge amount of different things that we do, and I'm more than happy always to collaborate with people. So again, just feel free to reach out. hello@tomorrowbiostasis.com or tomorrowbio. You find us on all the contact methods on our webpage. Just reach out. Next question is: how many cryonic suspension have you performed until now? So unfortunately, there are very few cryonics or suspensions in general, and especially in Europe. So we've done about 10 cases, but parts of those were from body donors. So people who do not want to be, so they weren't our members before, they don't even want to be cryopreserved, they just donate their body to science. Due to the fact that worldwide there's like 20 cases per year for all the organizations together, right? Of course, that fluctuates a bit, but about that number. Due to that low amount, it's impossible to train all your medical teams with real cases. And especially for us, since of course we're by now the largest organization in Europe, but we're of course not the largest yet worldwide, nor due to the fact that we have a relatively young member base. Luckily, these people don't die often. It's very crucial that any and every organization works with body donors to train their medical team. So that's what we do on a pretty regular basis. Next question is it true that nucleation occurs most intensely at a temperature around negative about 80 degrees Celsius? If yes, is it a good idea to transport the patient to CSO at dry ice temperatures? Yes. So, of course, again, like this is maybe not necessarily an introductory topic, but would be covered in more depth once we do the research. So, short answer, and if the person who asked it wants to have more information, feel free to reach out. So, if you go lower than 0 degrees Celsius, you have two different temperature ranges where on one hand ice nucleation happens. Ice nucleation is where basically the start of an ice crystal forms. This is called nucleation, called kind of forming a nucleus. And then there's a different temperature range, which is called the ice growth temperature range. So the ice crystal nucleates, and then the ice crystal grows around the nucleation site. Now, these two temperature ranges are kind of shifted a bit. So, in fact, you do not want to transport a body to a cryopreservation organization at dry ice temperatures. But it becomes complex, right? You also don't want to do that at water temperature, right? So water ice temperature, so 4 degrees about Celsius, right? So it really is a situation by situation case of what do you want to do in certain cases. High level, you want to cool down as quick as possible to around to cryogenic temperatures, so the glass transition temperatures, so around negative 120, negative 130 degrees. And from that point, you want to cool slow. You don't want to keep the temperature at dry ice or any other temperature for a long duration. We're going to discuss more and in more depth in the research webinar. Will you have translations in the next webinar? Probably not. We're going to look into that if we can at least have subtitles in different languages. We might be able to publish these webinars in different languages after, but spoken voice probably will be English for now, even though we're happy to look into that. And if there's multiple people reaching out to us, wanting and requesting different languages, we might make that a priority. So if that's the case, please reach out. Next question is if when technology is such that they can bring you back, are you still around? Well, so me personally, I think I'm going to be in cryopreservation as well then. So that's why I'm very much focused on making sure this is very stable and sound, because will be next to you in one of the doers. So we as an organization, everything that you can do to make an organization stable and sound and secure for very, very long durations, everything that came to our minds, we have done. So it's of course not the long-term storage. It's not with Tomorrow Bio. It's with a non-profit foundation, a Swiss non-profit foundation, right? Companies, organizations, and so on, associations, they're all not good to be around for very, very long. Foundations historically have shown that they're, from all their governance structure and so on, can be set up in a way where even for centuries, they do exactly what they've been set up to. And of course, all of that is the case in with our foundation that does the long-term storage. So I will do everything that I can over the next decades to add as many checks and balances and add as many security layers and so on to that foundation to make sure that the organization is still around, even though it might be, hundreds, hundreds of years in the future. Of course, I can't guarantee that, but we're going to do everything to make that happen. If there are no more questions on Slido, then I would switch over to YouTube questions. And that might now be a bit difficult to actually find those questions, at least in order. So bear with me. Let's see if there's any questions. And of course, if anybody has additional questions, feel free to post them now, either in YouTube or in Slido. So, where is a question? Yeah, just a comment, like, living longer, of course, would be very, very advantageous to cryopreservation, because, of course, it's absolutely crucial that if you decide to be cryopreserved, that then people are cryopreserved with the best possible technology. So for anybody who wants to be cryopreserved, it makes sense to live as long as humanly possible, right? Be fit, be healthy to live long, to then give medical technology time to, get good, get better over time, so that then if you're being cryopreserved, it would be with the best possible cryopreservation technology. Okay, there's a question. All right, would it be possible to apply new procedures to the bodies already cryopreserved using existing procedures? As in, are the new procedures backward compatible? Currently, mostly no. So once you've reached cryogenic temperatures, every advance that is being done, at least so far, of course it's possible that in the future there would be something that you can then apply to people who have already been in cryopreservation for a long time. Currently, that's not possible. The reason for that is, once you're at cryogenic temperatures, everything has gone to that glass-like amorphous called vitrified state. At that point, you can think of all the tissue kind of as a solid. So all technology that replaces cryoprotective agent or water against cryoprotective agent, all of that, it doesn't work anymore, because now it's a solid, in quotation marks at least. So current technology or new technology currently is not backward compatible. It is imaginable that some technology in the future would be, but so far, unfortunately, no. Next question would be, suspended animation does not do perfusions, but is doing blood washout before delivering the patient to CSO. Is it replacement of blood with normal saline, or what is it? So indeed, so there's kind of like different trains of thought, and we're going to cover that in the SST and procedures webinar next time, how you start the procedure. In our case, we do what is called whole body field cryoprotection, meaning the whole body is already perfused with the cryoprotective agent and cooled down on site. So the whole procedure is practically done without delay on site, and then at the cryopreservation facility, the final cool down is done. There are other cases where the process is done in a way where you only take out the blood, called blood washout, and then do the whole procedure once you have reached the facility. It's not done with saline, it's done with a specific type of so-called organ preservation solution, which is designed to keep organs functioning, not really, but at least preserving them as much as you can. And then you only give the cryoprotective agent once you have reached the facility. And as everything, there's trade-offs for one or the other option, like, it's again very situational. For our coverage area in Europe, it makes more sense for us, and not for us, but for the quality of cryopreservation, to do the whole cryoprotection procedure on site, in a kind of a field setting. Right, next question is there a form of insurance which is not age limited and would cover my cryopreservation regardless of when I die? Yes, there is. So there, by and large, and of course in the details you would need to discuss with an insurance broker, by and large there are two types of insurance, and there are kind of mixes between these two. One is the so-called term life insurance. Think of a term life insurance as a risk insurance, just like your car insurance, right? If you take it out, if you're insured for 1 year, then should something happen during that year, the insurance covers you, but it covers you from signing. From the day you sign, next day you're covered. That is called, in our case, term life insurance. You're covered for a certain duration. The second you sign, you're fully covered for the full amount, for example, 200,000. But if you die after the end date, then there's no coverage. That works if you're young, and we're going to cover that in the funding webinar in much more detail. That makes sense by and large when you're young. Then on the other hand, there's what is called whole life insurance. And again, there's a lot of varieties mixing, like index and so on. Whole life insurance is practically speaking a savings plan. You put money in, the insurance invests that money, and then should you die, you get whatever you put in, plus the interest, plus the return that was accumulated during that time where you had the contract. The advantage there is, there's no end date, However much you put in, it doesn't matter if it's like, after 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever, how many years, it is always, the money is always there. There's no end date. But the downside is, let's say you start that today, you put in $1,000, 1,000 euros, and then, you die next week, then there's just 1,000 euros in there, right? So it would not be enough, of course, then to cover the cost. Join our funding webinar. There's going to be a much more detail on how that works and what kind of combinations might make sense and so on. Right, one more question from Slido. Do you think it is a possibility that people will commit suicide early in life so that their body will be as young and healthy as possible when it is preserved? I would strongly advise against that, right? For a multitude of reasons. So first of all, it's not our place at all to speak to that at all. But from a quality perspective, the advantage of having a young body cryopreserved, and again, it's speculative, probably is significantly less important than to have the cryopreservation done with the newest technology. So the young body factor is, I think it's like many orders of magnitude. So like, 100x or whatever, it might be 1,000, or I don't know, like crazy, there's a crazy difference how much less important it is than having your body cryopreserved with the newest technology. So it absolutely makes sense to do everything, live healthy, fit, whatever, go to the gym, eat healthy, to be around to live as long as anyhow possible to then be cryopreserved with the newest technology. All right, a few more questions on YouTube. Would you consider changing your policy of not bringing back to life an 80-something-year-old if the life expectancy hasn't increased? So that becomes a very tough kind of discussion, right? And honestly, I don't have an answer to that, right? That would need to be decided in the future by the foundation that manages the organization that is the legal guardian for the cryopreserved people. Of course, it does not make sense to not bring someone back if it's possible, right? And if life expectancy hasn't increased. I would bet, or I'm reasonably confident that we would not get into that situation. The reason for that is there's significantly more economic interest currently in large pharmaceutical companies investing, venture capital investing in the technology to extend lifespan, to allow people to live longer. That's billions of dollars a year, and it's going to be probably multiple or multitudes of that in the future. So most likely, medical technology will first make it possible to live significantly longer, and then bringing someone back from cryopreservation will take more time. So the likelihood that we're going to come into the situation where you can bring someone back from cryopreservation and then their average life expectancy has not increased, or their remaining life expectancy at that age has not increased, I think is very low. If that should happen, there needs to be an ethical, an ethics board discussion, an ethics commission discussion of how to handle these cases. It's a tough question. Of course, technically, people at that point, once you if you're able to bring back people from cryopreservation, it's probably very easy to also put them back into cryopreservation. So you might even have the opportunity to ask the people themselves how they would like to handle it. But in the end, that would need to be an ethics board, an ethics commission would need to decide how to deal with that in the future. All right, next question. What country is your Cryonics center in? It's in Switzerland. So we decided to have the long-term storage and all the foundations in Switzerland, because Switzerland, first of all, it's has been and looks like it will be for the foreseeable future a very stable country, right? Both geographically, there are no earthquakes, actually in some regions of Switzerland there are some amount of earthquakes, but not where the facility is. It's a very socially and economically stable country, and it has a couple of advantages in their legal system where they're built to be very, very stable, especially for foundations, very, very stable and secure over very long periods of time. So it's in Switzerland on the Swiss-German border, very easily to reach, well, from Germany, and also then through Zurich airport, which is like 10 minutes away or so. Right, last question that I'm seeing, and of course feel free to send any last minute questions if you have any. Last question is, my term life insurance expires when I'm 90. After that, my assets would be able to use to fund it. Absolutely. So again, I need to refer to the funding webinar, but in short, yes, you can have like a term life insurance for however long you want, right? In our case, in Europe, it's mostly possible to do term life insurance to around 85 years of age, ballpark. There's also some insurance who can longer, some can do shorter, but that's kind of the ballpark. So you can do that for the early years to kind of be protected immediately. And then, of course, usually 85-year-olds have significantly more personal wealth than, let's say, 20, 30, or 40-year-old. So arguably, at that point, it might then be quite, maybe not easy, but doable to fund your cryopreservation cost out of pocket. And again, my hope and what we're working on would be that at that point, the cost would already be significantly more affordable than it is today. So if no one has any additional questions, and if my team doesn't see any questions that I might have missed, or if someone doesn't tell me that I've missed their question, then I think we have answered all the questions that they are. So I would again like to remind everybody, follow us, reach out to us, definitely start a conversation if this topic is at all interested, either as a volunteer getting involved, or potentially signing up, or whatever it is, you decide. Feel free to reach out at any point. We're more than happy to discuss and talk. And if there's no more discussions today, then join us again on March 23rd at 6 p.m. CET here on YouTube to have the next webinar about procedures and SST. Last but not least, thanks a lot for listening, and talk to you around.